Miriam had spent her life chasing history. As an archaeologist, she was fascinated by ancient civilizations and their mysteries. So, when she heard about the recently discovered temple hidden deep within an uncharted jungle, she knew she had to be the first to uncover its secrets. Despite the warnings from local villagers, who claimed the temple was cursed and filled with the souls of those who had been sacrificed to guard it, Miriam dismissed their tales as folklore. To her, it was just another story to be debunked, another myth to unravel. She set out early one morning, equipped with her tools and a backpack filled with supplies. The jungle loomed ahead, thick and dark, the trees towering high above her. The air was humid, the scent of moss and earth surrounding her as she ventured into the depths. Birds called out from the canopy, their cries echoing eerily in the stillness. Hours passed as she trekked through the dense foliage, guided only by a tattered map and her instincts. The journey was grueling, the underbrush thick and resistant, but finally, she caught sight of it, the entrance to the ancient temple. It was a massive stone structure, partially covered in vines and moss. Carvings of unknown symbols adorned its surface, their edges worn smooth by centuries of weather. The entrance was a gaping archway, leading into a darkness that seemed to swallow the light. Miriam hesitated at the threshold, feeling a wave of unease wash over her. The air here was different, heavier, as if the temple itself was alive and aware of her presence. She shook off the feeling, attributing it to nerves and the excitement of discovery. "It's just a temple," she muttered to herself, gripping the handle of her flashlight. With a deep breath, she stepped inside. The interior was pitch black, the only sound the echo of her footsteps on the stone floor. She switched on her flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness to reveal walls covered in intricate carvings. Scenes of rituals and sacrifices played out on the stone, telling the story of an ancient civilization that had once thrived here. But as she moved deeper, the air grew colder, and a faint whispering sound filled the silence. She paused, straining to listen. It was as if the walls themselves were speaking, murmuring in a language she couldn't understand. Miriam's flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows along the walls as she ventured further into the temple's depths. The passageway narrowed, leading her into a large chamber. The room was vast, with high ceilings that disappeared into darkness. Stone pillars lined the perimeter, each carved with symbols that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. In the center of the chamber stood a stone altar, its surface stained with dark patches that had long since dried. She approached the altar cautiously, feeling the weight of the room pressing down on her shoulders. The air was heavy, and the whispering grew louder, echoing off the walls in a chorus of disjointed voices. It felt as though the temple was alive, observing her, waiting for her to make a move. She placed a hand on the altar, running her fingers over the carvings etched into its surface. They depicted scenes of rituals, sacrifices, and worship of an unknown deity. As she examined the symbols, her flashlight flickered again before going out completely, plunging the chamber into darkness. Panic surged through her, and she fumbled with the flashlight, tapping it desperately to bring it back to life. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, filling the room with an eerie hum. It was then that she realized the shadows around her were moving. Her breath hitched as she turned, her eyes scanning the room. The shadows, once still, now writhed and twisted, stretching across the walls in unnatural ways. They took on forms, figures with elongated limbs and hollow eyes, their bodies bending in impossible angles. They moved toward her, slowly but purposefully, their mouths opening and closing as if trying to speak. Miriam backed away, her heart pounding in her chest. The room seemed to close in on her, the shadows surrounding her from all sides. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "This can't be real." She stumbled back, her foot catching on a stone, sending her sprawling to the ground. The shadows loomed over her, their forms towering above as the whispering crescendoed into a cacophony of voices. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the shadows retreated, slinking back into the corners of the room. Her flashlight flickered back on, casting a pale beam of light across the chamber. Miriam scrambled to her feet, her hands trembling as she aimed the light toward the altar. The symbols on its surface glowed faintly, pulsing with a light of their own. As the adrenaline coursed through her veins, Miriam took a step back from the altar, her mind racing to make sense of what she had just seen. The shadows had moved, but how? Was it some trick of the light? Some ancient mechanism built into the temple's architecture? She tried to rationalize, but the memory of the shadows' movement was burned into her mind. They had felt too real, too conscious. She moved to the far end of the chamber, where another passageway beckoned her deeper into the temple's depths. The air grew colder as she advanced, her flashlight casting long shadows on the stone walls. The corridor wound downward, twisting and turning as if it were leading her into the very heart of the earth. The walls here were lined with carvings, similar to those in the chamber, depicting scenes of rituals and sacrifices. As she turned a corner, the beam of her flashlight fell upon a figure at the end of the corridor. Miriam froze, her heart skipping a beat. The figure was tall and draped in a tattered cloak, its face obscured by shadow. For a moment, it remained still, its presence unnerving in the narrow passageway. Then, slowly, it turned to face her, and she caught a glimpse of hollow eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. "Who are you?" Miriam called out, her voice echoing off the walls. The figure did not respond. Instead, it raised a skeletal hand, pointing down the corridor to a large, intricately carved doorway. The whispering began again, filling the air with words that she could not understand but which sent chills down her spine. Miriam took a cautious step forward, her eyes locked on the figure. It remained motionless, its arms still outstretched. With each step she took, the whispering grew louder, resonating in her skull like the beating of a drum. The door loomed ahead, its surface covered in carvings of faces twisted in agony. It was then that she realized. This was a tomb, a place where something, or someone, was imprisoned. The figure stepped aside as she approached the door, vanishing into the shadows as if it had never been there. Her hands trembled as she reached out to touch the door, feeling the cold stone. Under her fingers, the carvings seemed to writhe beneath her touch, shifting and contorting into new shapes. She took a deep breath and pushed against the door, which groaned in protest before slowly creaking open. Miriam pushed the heavy stone door open, revealing a small chamber bathed in an eerie, flickering light. The walls were covered in ancient carvings, but unlike the ones she had seen before, these depicted scenes of chaos and destruction, villages burning, figures screaming in terror, and a massive, shadowy figure looming above it all. At the far end of the room, nestled in a stone pedestal, lay the object of her quest, the ancient relic. It was a small, jagged piece of obsidian, resting atop the pedestal like a dark jewel. Despite its size, it radiated an energy that seemed to pulse through the room, making the air feel thick and hard to breathe. The light in the chamber dimmed as Miriam approached the relic, her heart pounding in her chest. She had read about objects like this in ancient texts, artifacts believed to connect the living world with the spirit realm, capable of both great power and unimaginable destruction. As she drew closer, the whispering that had followed her throughout the temple reached a crescendo, filling her mind with jumbled words and fragmented images. Faces twisted in agony, hands reaching out from the darkness, and a massive shadow looming over her. She stumbled, gripping the edge of the pedestal to steady herself. The obsidian relic seemed to glow faintly, as if responding to her touch. Suddenly, the chamber grew colder, and the shadows around the room began to move. Miriam glanced around, her pulse quickening as the shadows coalesced into figures, warriors, priests, and villagers, their faces gaunt and eyes hollow. They moved toward her in silence, their forms flickering like candle flames in the dim light. She stepped back, her hands trembling, but found herself unable to look away from the relic. The shadows stopped a few feet from the pedestal, forming a circle around her. One of them, taller and more imposing than the others, stepped forward, raising a skeletal hand toward the relic. "The relic must remain," it intoned, its voice echoing through the chamber like a distant drumbeat. "It binds us. It binds you." Miriam took a shaky breath, her mind racing. She had come here to uncover the relic, to bring it back to the world of the living. But now, standing in the presence of the shadowy figures, she realized that the relic was more than just an artifact. It was a prison, a vessel for the souls trapped within the temple. The relic's energy surged through the room, pressing against her senses, making it hard to think clearly. The taller figure stepped closer, its hollow eyes fixed on hers. "We are bound to this place by the relic's curse," it continued, its voice a low, rumbling growl. "Remove it, and we are released. But so too is the darkness it contains." Miriam's heart pounded as she struggled to comprehend the magnitude of what she had found. If she took the relic, she would be releasing the spirits, and the darkness they guarded, into the world. But if she left it behind, the souls would remain trapped, bound to the temple for eternity. She glanced down at the obsidian, feeling its cold energy seeping into her skin. "No," she whispered, taking a step back. "There has to be another way." The whispering around her grew louder, filling the chamber with a cacophony of voices pleading, cursing, and crying. The figures shifted and flickered, their forms distorting as they moved closer. The air grew thick with tension, pressing against her chest like a vice. She could feel the weight of the relic's power, its hunger for release. It had been sealed away for centuries, hidden from the world by the ancient civilization that had built the temple. Now, it was calling to her, urging her to take it and break the chains that bound it. Miriam's hands shook as she reached out toward the relic. The air around her crackled with energy, the shadows whispering in her ears. For a moment, everything went silent, and all she could hear was her own heartbeat, pounding in rhythm with the relic's glow. As her fingers brushed against the relic, a shockwave of energy surged through her body, knocking her to the ground. The chamber vanished, replaced by a blinding light that filled her vision. She blinked, trying to clear her sight, and found herself standing in a village, surrounded by people dressed in ancient clothing. It was as if she had been transported back in time. The villagers moved about, tending to fires, preparing food, and conducting rituals near the temple. In the center of the village stood the obsidian relic, glowing with a soft, pulsing light. The air was filled with chanting, a deep, resonant sound that reverberated through the ground. Miriam watched in stunned silence as a group of priests approached the relic, their faces solemn. They carried a bound figure toward the stone, a young woman struggling against her restraints. The villagers gathered around, their eyes fixed on the scene with a mixture of fear and reverence. The priests placed the woman on the ground before the relic, raising their hands to the sky as they began to chant. A sense of horror washed over Miriam as she realized she was witnessing the ritual that had cursed the temple. The relic flared brightly, casting long shadows across the ground as the priests chanted louder. The air grew heavy, and the woman's screams filled the air, mingling with the chants in a chilling harmony. The light from the relic intensified, and Miriam felt a surge of energy that pulled her back, dragging her out of the vision and into darkness. She gasped, finding herself back in the chamber, her body sprawled on the cold stone floor. The shadows around her swayed, their forms flickering as if reacting to what she had seen. She now understood. The relic was not just an artifact. It was a vessel of sacrifice, a tool used by the ancient civilization to bind spirits to the temple and maintain a balance between the living and the dead. Miriam lay on the cold stone floor, her breath coming in ragged gasps as the reality of what she had witnessed sank in. The shadows surrounding her pulsed with a dark energy, whispering words of despair and warning. She pushed herself to her feet, her body trembling from the strain of the visions. The relic remained on the pedestal, glowing with an unsettling intensity, as if mocking her hesitation. The chamber felt smaller now, the air suffocating as the walls seemed to close in around her. She knew what the relic was capable of and the price that had been paid to keep it contained. But as an archaeologist driven by curiosity, the weight of knowledge pressed heavily on her mind. She needed to understand more, why the relic had been sealed away and what exactly its power entailed. The shadows around her shifted, forming into a familiar figure, the tall guardian she had seen earlier. It stood motionless, its hollow eyes fixed on her. To take the relic is to accept its curse, it intoned, its voice resonating through the chamber. "It will demand sacrifices. Your soul will be bound to the temple until a new guardian takes your place." Miriam's pulse quickened. She now faced an impossible choice. If she left the relic, it would remain sealed, and the souls of the past would continue to suffer. If she took it, she would risk unleashing its dark power upon the world. But perhaps, with enough knowledge, she could find a way to contain or destroy it once and for all. It was a gamble that could cost her everything. As she stood in indecision, the relic's glow intensified, filling the room with a pulsating light. The whispering grew louder, echoing through the chamber with a desperate urgency. The shadows loomed closer, their forms blurring and stretching as if to envelop her. Miriam's eyes locked onto the relic. Her heart pounded with the knowledge of what was at stake. "I can't let this darkness continue," she whispered, reaching out toward the relic. "But I won't become its prisoner." With a deep breath, she grasped the obsidian, feeling a jolt of energy surge through her body. The room darkened, and the shadows lunged toward her. As Miriam held the relic, the temperature in the room plummeted, and a deafening roar filled her ears. The shadows around her surged forward, swirling into a vortex of darkness that surrounded her on all sides. She cried out as the force of the energy threatened to tear her apart, pulling her toward the center of the room. The relic pulsed in her hand, its glow seeping into her skin, filling her with a chilling coldness. She felt her vision blur as the shadows closed in, their whispering turning into a chorus of tormented screams. Faces twisted in agony appeared within the swirling darkness, mouths open in silent cries for help. She struggled against the pull, her heart pounding in terror. "Release us," the voices screamed, a cacophony that threatened to shatter her mind. "Or join us in eternal darkness." Miriam gritted her teeth, holding onto the relic with every ounce of strength she had. She had come here to find the truth, and now she was confronted with the horrifying reality of the relic's power. The temple was a prison, not just for the souls it held, but for anyone who dared to challenge its curse. If she was going to survive, she needed to use the relic against the very darkness it commanded. Summoning all her willpower, she raised the relic high above her head. The shadows recoiled, shrinking back as if in fear. "You will not take me," she shouted, her voice echoing through the chamber. The relic flared brightly, casting a blinding light that pierced through the darkness, driving the shadows into the corners of the room. The roar ceased, replaced by a profound silence. The shadows retreated to the edges of the chamber, leaving Miriam standing alone in the center. Her body shook from the effort, sweat dripping down her face. She glanced at the relic in her hand, its glow now dim and flickering. The power within it had responded to her defiance, but she knew this was only the beginning. The silence that followed was unnerving, filling the chamber with an eerie stillness. Miriam stood panting, her eyes darting around for any sign of movement. The shadows lingered at the edges of the room, their forms faint and subdued. She had managed to push them back, but the relic's power still pulsed ominously in her grip. Then, from the darkness, the tall guardian figure emerged once more. It moved toward her slowly, its hollow eyes fixed on the relic in her hand. "You have challenged the relic's power," it intoned, its voice carrying an edge of respect. "But to break the curse, you must accept the burden." Miriam stared at the figure, her mind racing. The relic was the key, the source of the curse that bound the souls to the temple. The guardian was offering her a choice: to leave the relic and maintain the balance, or to take it and carry its curse. She clenched her fist around the obsidian, feeling its coldness seep into her skin. She had already risked everything to uncover the truth. She couldn't leave now without ending the cycle of suffering. "Then I will become the guardian," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her heart. "But not to imprison more souls. I will find a way to destroy this curse once and for all." The guardian nodded, its form shimmering and fading into the darkness. The room grew colder, and the shadows around her began to swirl once more. The temple itself seemed to groan in response to her words, as if acknowledging the shift in power. The relic in her hand warmed, its glow intensifying. "Very well." The guardian's voice echoed through the chamber. But remember, the relic will test you. It will seek to corrupt you. Only through strength and sacrifice can you break its hold. Miriam turned toward the chamber's exit, the relic clutched tightly in her hand. The whispering resumed, but now it was different, a soft murmur that seemed to guide her toward the way out. She took a step forward, her legs feeling heavy as if weighted by the burden she had accepted. The air around her vibrated with an unnatural energy, making each breath feel like a struggle. The shadows parted as she walked, retreating to the corners of the room. The temple walls trembled, dust and small stones falling from the ceiling. It was as if the entire structure was reacting to the shift in power, to the fact that the relic was leaving its ancient prison. She continued through the passageway, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on her. The path to the entrance felt longer than before, each step dragging her deeper into exhaustion. Yet, the relic in her hand pulsed with a guiding light, leading her through the darkness. The whispering around her faded into a soft hum, like a distant chant. She pushed forward, the exit coming into view as a faint sliver of light in the distance. Finally, she emerged from the temple, gasping as the fresh air hit her face. The jungle outside was eerily quiet, the trees standing still as if watching her. She turned to look back at the temple, its ancient stone structure looming behind her. The shadows within seemed to writhe, pressing against the walls as if searching for a way out. Miriam raised the relic, feeling its cold energy pulse through her. "I will find a way to end this curse," she vowed, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her heart. "You will not hold another soul." The relic glowed faintly, its light flickering in response. The temple groaned, the sound echoing through the jungle like a warning. She turned away, stepping into the dense foliage. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with dangers both known and unknown. But she had made a choice, and now she carried the burden of the relic's curse. The temple's secrets were hers to unravel, and she would not stop until she had freed the souls trapped within. If this tale of the ancient relic chilled you to the bone, make sure to hit subscribe for more tales of supernatural horror and ancient curses. Don't forget to ring the notification bell to join us on our next terrifying adventure. Have you ever encountered something ancient that felt alive? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story kept you on the edge of your seat, give it a thumbs up. Remember, some relics are meant to stay buried,